The next topic for us is the relationship between the firm size and innovation. As we talked about earlier, there were two major hypotheses coming from Schumpeter's work, and one of them was related to the size of the firm and whether that influences the firm to innovate. Here is what Schumpeter has said. Essentially, he said that the large firms would have resources, the modern corporations would have more resources to spend on innovation. That lead to differences between the innovation activities of the small entrepreneurial firms as compared to the large modern firms. Now, if you have to econometrically verify this relationship, essentially what is to be done? That the innovation should increase more than proportionally than the firm size. And what has been done is essentially that most of the studies, they will take data from the firms, either in the cross section or in the panel data, and then they will regress the some measure of innovation. Earlier we have already seen a long list of the measures which are available to capture or to operationalize innovation activity on a some measure of the size of the firm. So, before we go into the result of those empirical studies, first let us look at why is it that the large firms are expected to have an advantage over the small or maybe an entrepreneurial firm to invest in research and development. The first and foremost point is with respect to the capital market imperfection. In our discussion on the financing of R&D, we will look at that there are challenges with respect to information asymmetry and moral hazard when it comes to investing in R&D project. There is always a fear from an investor end that the innovator or the inventor may not engage in the activity which may be beneficial for the which will be beneficial for the investor, and that agency problem then lead to a restricted or a limited amount of available in the capital market for the research and development. As a result, many times the firm has to now depend on their own resources. Internal resources then become a very important source for research and development. Apart from that, there are scale economies in the R&D function. If the amount of investment that you do on the R&D function, it will lead to more than increase in the proportion of the outcome that will come forward. Here you can relate what do you mean by scale economies of scale, whereby you say that in case if you increase both the labor and capital, let us say double the labor and capital, and your output increases more than double. Here you say that it's a case of increasing returns to scale. In the same way, if you look at the R&D function or the knowledge production function as has been talked about, thereby the outcome can in the form of, let us say, patents, some other outcome, maybe new product or process, which would be now function of the labor, which will be including the R&D personnel, and will also have a capital. This capital investment can be made on the lab itself, on purchasing of the various instrument and the equipment that are needed for the research, right? So in this kind of a knowledge production function, the scale economies are also being enjoyed. If that is the case, that means the companies which are bigger in size, they will be able to invest more and as a result enjoy the scale economies. Not only that, there are higher returns which will be enjoyed by the companies from R&D from the high sales value. So that means the companies which are large, if their sales are rather large, they will be able to spread this amount which they have now spent on R&D over a large volume of goods. If they are able to sell, let me give you an example. Say for instance, a company reduces the cost of production. If it is merely producing 100 units, vis-a-vis, let us say it is producing 10,000 units and selling it in the market in a week, right? Clearly, if you have a large volume of sale, you will be now able to spread this entire amount that you have spent on R&D over a large volume. The per unit fixed cost in that case is going to come down considerably. The another is complementarities between R&D and other non-manufacturing activities. There are What will those non-manufacturing activities entail? Maybe something like related to advertisement or related to distribution. Yes. So, if you have come up, or maybe other marketing techniques. So, if you have now conducted this kind of an R&D, the company is large and it's selling large volume, there can be more complementarity between the R&D activities with respect to the such non-manufacturing activity. You have come up with a new product, so the marketing, the advertisement, the distribution of it now can be once again spread out. Economies of scope and reduced risk. What do you mean by economies of scope? Essentially a firm which is more and more diversified. That means the firm has more products in its kitty which it is selling to the buyers. Now that will reduce the risk which is associated with the prospective returns from R&D. Now, suppose we are thinking of a research and development activity which the company has done, and in that process they come up with a particular product. Suppose it was a chemical, firm, and they are coming up with they get a particular kind of an outcome of their research investment, whereby they find a chemical which spreads very easily in the air. Right now, if this chemical company is only engaged with, let us say, maybe paints or something like that, they will not be able to use it much. But if it has a very diversified portfolio, maybe one of its wing is actually into maybe mosquito repellent or something, then they can use the property of this particular chemical to, because in a mosquito repellent you want it to spread much faster within a particular room, right? So if the particular company has more products in its kitty, that means the risk which is associated with the innovation outcome not being used, right, that reduces. So it's not only that now that you have to look for a partner whom you can license this particular product or something like that, but if you have a diversified set of groups, there is a potential, there is a possibility, there is a prospect, at least in some or the another, this innovation outcome can be used. Hence, there is a reduced risk associated with the prospective returns. So then, on the other side, the literature also talks about why is it that the large firm will not engage in innovation activity. The most important argument is that large organization efficiency is undermined. They may not be very much focused on coming up with a new and better product. The incentive of the individual scientists and inventors would be rather low. They will be a part of the whole R&D division, which is rather broad, and they might be engaged in a small, routinized work related to that, and may not actually related to the introduction of the new product in that very close sense. Indeed, Schumpeter also has highlighted that this entire process of bureaucratization of inventive activity will actually lead to the contribution to the decline of capitalism, as the new products which are being introduced, they would rather reduce. So let us now look at the empirical research. Empirical research in this case is also very vast, and you also find that many times they find very ambiguous results. To begin with, initially studies they find a positive result. However, these studies were not controlling for the industry specific effects. It was pointed out that there is a need to distinguish between firm size and that of the business unit. And once that was being done, the studies actually found that there are industry level variations. That means in certain industries you will find that the firm size, as it increases, the innovation increases, whereas in other set of industries you will find that as the firm size increases, it may not lead to increase in the R&D activity. So then what we find that a certain set of empirical studies have found that R&D rises proportionally with size among the R&D performers. So is that the behavior of the firms which are undertaking R&D vis-a-vis the firms which are not undertaking R&D is same. One argument was being given that when we are conducting this kind of empirical studies, we are putting together both the companies which are doing R&D and the companies which are not doing R&D, and accordingly seeing whether what happens with respect to the proportional increase in the innovation activity with respect to the size. Another set of studies, they looked at merely the companies which are R&D performers. So they found that amongst the R&D performers, as the size of the company increases, the research and development activity also increases. However, these studies have very clearly highlighted that there is a need to make a distinction between the innovative input and output. That means what kind of a measure you are going to use for the research and development activity, for the innovation activity, is very important. Whether you are employing investment in the research and development, or whether you are using the patent as or maybe an improved version like a citation weighted patent as a measure for the innovation. In that sense, the relationship between size has also seemed to influence the kind of innovation which is taken, whether it is incremental, radical, process or the product one. So what we find is that with respect to R&D productivity and firm size, larger incumbent firms, they tend to pursue relatively more incremental and relatively more process innovation. This point also we have highlighted earlier. From the incumbent firm, which is now let us say a large in size, clearly any kind of a product innovation might entail changing their entire organizational setup. If that is very costly for them, they will be more or less always being engaged in bringing in an incremental change, because the associated complementary changes in their own organization would be rather minimal. It will be supported by that. So as a result, large incumbent firms may end up rather pursuing incremental and relatively more process innovation. Whereas, with respect to the new ventures and the entrants are chiefly responsible for radical innovation. For instance, if you see what has been going on in the electric vehicle segment in the country right now, you find that many more startups are coming up which are either introducing new types of batteries or whether changing in terms of the product that they have, and the presence of the startups is rather very large as compared to maybe a segment in an industry which is more saturated as compared to with the involvement of the existing incumbent. So when the technology in this case is rather very radical, which is changing the way changing the absolute way of the doing things, you find them the new ventures and entrants enter. Here once again an important point comes with respect to the path dependency. That means the companies which are already elaborate, which are already large, and they are using a saturated technologies, they have also locked into that technology. It becomes very difficult for them to bring in an absolutely new or a radical innovation. In those cases, you may find that, let us say, there have been instances that they might, if these large firms have resources, they may actually, acquire the small firms over a period of a time. However, that will depend upon a lot more other factors in that particular industry. Cohen and Klepper, they also talk about the cost spreading model, and whereby they say that the returns essentially increases from the contemporaneous firm size because the firm will embody innovation in their own output. They are also expected to grow due to the innovation. So on the one hand, suppose now the firm is innovating and coming up with a new product, and that product actually has a market and it begins to sell. That itself will feed into the size of the firm, and it may result into the increased sales revenue for them, and the size of the firm in that case will also grow. So once again, talking from a point of view of the feedback effect from the firm. In the Indian case, what we have found, study by Ray and Bhaduri, initially R&D effort increases with size, but they decreases and fall after attaining a certain size. Kumar and Agarwal, they have studied the firm activity in the pre and post reform, and they found that R&D expenditure increases with the size. Ghosh has also found larger sizes influence R&D. Kathak has pointed out very important point that as far as the large firms are concerned, they are insulated from the market competition because of the domination that they have. And again, you can also put it together with the diseconomies in terms of coordination, mismanagement. For instance, if they come up with a new product, like I told earlier, the existing routines may be disturbed, organizational setup has to be changed. So there is a possibility of a non-linear relationship. That means initially with the increase in the size of the firm, the innovation activity actually increases. It reaches a threshold level, and after that it does come down. The Nora et al. In their study in a non-linear, the Nora et al. In their study using patent as an outcome of the knowledge production function, they have found a non-linear effect to be present in the Indian context. The studies once again pointed out that this relationship between the firm size and innovation is not something which is very isolated from the other firm characteristics. Other firm characteristics means whether the firm is having an access to cash flow or not, whether it is diversified or not, whether it has complementary capabilities or not. So these other characteristics also influences the impact the size of the firm has on the innovation activity. Say for instance cash flow. We have identified that the capital markets are imperfect, right? So especially when the outcome is uncertain, any company which has a large let us say retained profit or has deep pockets, they would be able to invest more in research and development. Once again, diversification, we have already seen an example of that. The more diversified, the more products a particular company has in its own kitty to produce, we will find that the innovation activities can also be more, because the uncertainty related to the prospective effect of that R&D outcome can be reduced. TS has at length talked about the various complementary capabilities of the company. He has picked up from the Williamson's work in 1975, and he has pointed out that there are a lot of asset specificity, there is opportunism, there is a difference in the internal organization, inter-firm relationship, and that will influence the relationship between firm size and innovation activity. Now, one also has to identify that when we are talking about this relationship, the firm is located in a specific industry. Now, this specific industry may have certain characteristics with respect to demand and supply conditions. That is also once again going to impact the relationship. What are those circumstances? That might be related to demand, technological opportunities, and appropriability regime. Appropriability regime will essentially once again mean whether the firm will be able to benefit, whether they will be able to make complete benefits from their intellectual property or not, or whether the imitators will swarm the market as soon as they come up with a product and they will not be able to save their turf. Technological opportunities essentially is related to the dynamism that is there with respect to the change in the technology in that particular sector. Clearly, if you are always fearing that a new startup can come up in this sector, can actually dismantle our own position, then the motivation to investment in R&D are rather very different as compared to a very saturated kind of a industry. The demand circumstances, whether it is a growing market, saturated market, once again will influence the motivation of the firm to invest. So what we are saying is that the relationship between the firm size and that of the innovation activity is conditioned by various other characteristics. Those characteristics can belong to firm in terms of whether they are cash flow or not, diversified or not, and whether they have the complementary capabilities or not. On the other hand, they can also be influenced by the specific conditions, circumstances in that particular industry. And many a time, empirical research has pointed out that those factors become rather very prominent.